Hey guys, what's cracking? Godsmack here, coming at you with another deck profile. Today, it's a highly anticipated one as we've got the reveal of the brand new Bavsargra retrain, Sealed Blaze of Arbitration, Bavsargra Aksayya. Now, this is one of the most anticipated retrains of the Divine's era, and perhaps one of the most anticipated retrains of all of standard format Vanguard. I kid you not. Bavsargra is an immensely popular unit, and I mean, to me, she's best girl, but you know, as those of you who are veterans of the channel, you already know my thoughts on her, right? So this was obvious, but this is also somewhat of a ubiquitous thing among most people that Bavsargra is a fairly popular unit, and they did her justice with this new retrain, giving a complete overhaul of not just the entire ride line, including the grade 3, but also giving us 2 more arms cards to work with and a couple of other powerful additions to the deck. That combined with a couple of divine support that has been matriculating for the deck ever since its inception back in the Overdress era, and we've got something that is honestly fit for potential competitive play. Perhaps not a tier 1 deck on release, but something that is definitely super powerful and competent, and perhaps even the frontrunner deck of the set 7 decks that are going to be releasing, although this may or may not change depending on how Artisaria's reveal is going to shake up the audience. Now, having said all that, before we get into the deck profile, let's go ahead and quickly bring up that I do a lot of Vanguard content on this channel, whether it's top 10s, anime reactions, fight nights, discussions, I do it all. So if you're looking for more content like this or other forms of Vanguard content, then look no further than this channel. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and if you like this video, turn on the notification button for the next time I upload a deck profile video like this. And now with all that said, let's go ahead and get into the deck profile. I hope you enjoy. So starting off with the ride line, of course, we're going to begin with Arhinsa's Sphere. So it's just a normal star like anything else, but also like the original Bavsargra ride line, you are forced to run this because it's required by name. And that is from Namorkahr Anui, the new grade 1 of the ride line. And before you ask, no, this is not a real energy generator. It was a custom uploaded by a fan, and honestly, it's a very beautiful custom, but if you're looking for it online right now, you're not going to find it. Sorry, fellas. Anyway, so back to Namorkahr Anui. So Namorkahr says that when he rides over Sphere, you're able to not only Soul Blast 1, but you also have to pay the cost of revealing Aksayya in the ride deck, aka you must be riding into Aksayya in turn 3 in order to activate its skills. Now, for all of that, you actually get a very powerful ride line skill where you perform one of the following, or if you win second, you perform both of the following. You can add a Sealed Blaze Sword Dyaava to the hand, and or you can add a Sealed Blaze Shield Bowdhanath to the hand. Now, these are the new arms cards that Bavsargra got in this set, and they're both incredibly powerful arms cards with a bunch of different skills and benefits to provide to the deck, and is one of the fundamental reasons why this deck is so much more powerful, but we'll get into those in a minute. This is a very impressive ride line skill because not only is it a strong deliberate +1 if you're going first, but it's a +2 if you're going second. That's absolutely ludicrous value here, especially because it's not even asking for any discards or whatnot like a lot of other ride lines. For instance, in set 1, Velsh's ride line requires a Soul Blast and discard to get 2 order cards. This one doesn't even force the discard, so it's incredible. Having said that though, it is worth noting that the reason why it reveals Aksayya in the ride deck is because back in the day, Metatrends showed that the Bavsargra ride line, the original one, was actually a generic ride line that a lot of Dragon Empire decks used in order to get the free shield to the hand, and then by discarding and adding it back with Halibadra, you were able to get 2 instances of discard fodder and make more or less the act of riding free. So that's why they didn't want it with this ride line, because this is an even more powerful version, so they locked it into just Bavsargra Aksayya. So good move on Bushy's part. Moving on to Halibadra Balat, Halibadra says that when it's rode upon by Aksayya, so again, a very xenophobic ride line, you can counterblast 1 in order to search the deck for up to 2 arms cards with different card names from each other and discard them. Then afterwards, you can arm one of them to your Vanguard. So this ride line is a very powerful one. It does get you not just 1 but 2 arms cards of your choice from the deck to the drop zone and then arming it. Now, the reason why this is powerful is threefold. 1, it means that you can use whatever arms card that you have in the drop zone, so you have a really good massive toolbox. 2, by dumping them in there, you're able to have them set up for Vylord plays, which for those of you who don't know, Vylord is the Overdress deck where you're able to take arms cards, put 1 in the soul and arm the other in your Vanguard. So you're setting up Vylord basically for free there. Well, I guess it's for a counterblast, but you know what I mean, right? You're able to set it up without needing to see those arms cards at all. So that's really powerful. And one final benefit about doing it this way is that by discarding those arm cards from deck to the drop zone and then arming one of your Vanguard, you're also deck filtering, because you're not going to be drive checking into Arms cards later, which customarily was one of the things that made Bavsargra a little bit clunky, was if you saw too many Arms cards in the hand. And a lot of the ways to fix that issue, they weren't very good cards. Like for instance, Tixania was the only thing it did was it would discard an Arms card to give you more draw power. Here, you don't even need to run into that problem. You just dump them where they honestly are more viable anyway, and they don't clog up your deck. So overall, incredibly impressive ride line. And that's not even the best part. No, the best part would be best girl. So introducing Sealed Blades of Arbitration, Bavsargra Aksayya. Welcome back, girl. Ooh, she looking fine, and she got a lot of really strong effects here. That's 4 of them things right there, so let's get into it. So first off is a continuous skill which treats her as Sealed Blades made of Bavsargra. So straight away, this is actually a very powerful skill, because for those of you who may or may not be familiar with this, the arms cards for Bavsargra say very explicitly that they can only be armed to Sealed Blades made of Bavsargra by name. So being treated as Bavsargra is the thing that's actually going to allow her to actually be armed with any of the old arms cards. If she didn't have this clause, then she wouldn't be backwards compatible with the Bavsargra support. It's also noteworthy that this is the same thing with Trick Moon. Trick Moon's dress boost says that when it boosts, if your Bavsargra has an arms card armed to it, then it gives 10,000 to the boosted unit to end the battle for each one that it's armed to. So you need this name synergy, so that's already really good. Now, next up is an act skill. Act on the Vanguard circle once per turn. The cost is to put a card from your hand into your soul, and in so doing, you choose an arms card for the drop and arm it to your Vanguard. Hallelujah, this is incredible. So by doing this, you not only get to arm a card from your drop zone of your choice, which they're going to be there because of Halibadra Balat. Let's keep that in mind. This is an incredibly harmonious ride line, but it's also building soul in the process where you're doing that. And it's not a soul charge anymore, which, as anyone who's played this game for a while knows, soul charge can be kind of painful if your deck isn't revolved around it, because you can lose a lot of really powerful triggers and pieces that way. This doesn't run into that problem anymore, and so it's beautiful that way. Now, to kind of skip over the other act skill here for a second, let's address the auto skill, where it says auto on the Vanguard circle once per turn. When this unit is armed, you not only energy charge 1, you choose a grade 1 or less card for the drop zone and call to the rear circle. But if you choose Vylord through this method, you're able to overdress it over Trick Moon instead. Oh man, so as opposed to the old one where you called the grade 1 or less than soul charge, this one doesn't soul charge anymore because you're building soul with that other act skill. So now you're energy charging instead, which admittedly there's not a lot of reason to energy charge in this deck. It doesn't have anything that is inherently energy blasting aside from a couple of the grade 2s, and they're only EB3, so you don't really need that little notch up. However, that notch up is useful in that if you don't see those EB3s, which there aren't any required energy blasts, right? So there could be situations where even if you see the EB3, you don't need to use the EB3. So instead, by notching up to 1, let's say you went first, you're at 6 energy, you then notch up to 1 to become 7, you energy blast 7 to get that draw, and the next turn you just energy charge back up to 3, and then you can use one of the EB3 skills if you like. So it kind of pushes you over the edge in order to get that draw effect from energy generator, which is probably the only real benefit that I could detect with this energy charge henceforth. However, that said, the Vylord one, wow, what an upgrade, right? Vylord was one of the things that made this deck super gimmicky, because you had a lot of pieces to juggle. You had to juggle your arms cards, you had to juggle things that would arm your Vanguard, things that would search your arms cards, getting your Trick Moon and potentially searching your Trick Moon, and then also being able to see Vylord and overdress it specifically from the hand over that Trick Moon that you had to dump and then superior call from the drop zone. So you had to juggle so much here, but now those arm cards are in the drop and get recurred every single turn, especially from your Vanguard herself. Super stable game plan there, no clunkiness, and now you can even overdress Vylord from the drop zone. So what this says about Bavsargra Aksayya overall is it is a supremely stable Vanguard. You don't really lose out on anything anymore. You're not going to brick in the late game. You're not going to run out of resources unless you play, I'm just going to say blatantly, if you play a bit dumb. This is even giving you a soul every single turn. This is giving you an energy every single turn. It doesn't inherently counterblast. And even though both Dyaava and Bowdhanath counterblast when you arm them, she circumvents that cost by arming them of her own ability, so you don't even need to CB for that anymore. So even though you're paying a lot of costs up front, right, this soul blast immediately, this counter blast immediately, it's worth noting that the later the game goes on, the more you're going to be able to stabilize and not need to pay anything more than you want to. So that's a supremely powerful benefit for Bavsargra. One final thing to note is that she's inherited an upgraded version of her other iconic Act skill, where act on the Vanguard circle once per turn if it's armed with 2 or more cards. It's funny that they say, you know, more cards, even though she can only realistically be armed with 2. You're able to Soul Blast 2 and retire all of your opponent's front or rear guards, and this gets a critical, so the same as before. However, they've added on a really nice quality of life clause where if you didn't retire any cards with this effect, then you draw a card. So even if you're just there really for the critical and they have no front row, you do get a draw. So the Soul Blast 2 does feel more worth it than ever before. So overall, a 10 out of 10 card, 11 out of 10 if I'm being real here. Bavsargra was given so much justice in this set. One could even say she's just a tad overtuned if anything, but I'm here for it because this was a very Vanguard-centric deck by its very nature, so your Vanguard doing a lot of the legwork makes a lot of sense. And honestly, the MVP here has to go to her being able to arm herself, because by being able to do that, you've effectively made the Vanguard somewhat self-sufficient and not relying on a card every single turn to get you to where you need to go. So yeah, Bushiroad, top marks there. Very well done. That does it for the ride deck, so let's go ahead and get into the main deck, shall we? Starting off with Persona Rides as usual, we have 3 Persona Rides to bear with here. Now, you don't really need max Persona Rides in a deck like Bavsargra because it's a very tight deck list and there's a lot of different pieces that you could use for more power or resource gamings, but I think that Persona Ride kind of encapsulates both power and resource as a whole, and the only thing that's kind of like bad about it is that it's a no shield value card that you have to wait a turn in order to get the benefit of it, but when you do Persona Ride, it's huge, right? I mean, everyone knows that 10,000 to front row draw cards are already good, but it's also worth noting that with Bavsargra in particular, you have more Soul Blast in this variant than you did before. So now as a result of that, you're going to be a little bit more soul hungry than before. And Persona Ride is a great way to make the difference between a Soul Blast skill that you could use before and one that you now can't use if you didn't get the Persona Ride off. So running 3 copies of this is honestly fair, and I think you could opt to not run it, but it's also worth noting that one of the reasons why people didn't run as many Persona Ride copies is they felt that their hands were a little bit clunky. However, as you see before you, a lot of these, we're not running a lot of arms cards. We're only running 6 arms cards, so it's a very light ship here. And many of these arms cards are actually going to be going either to the hand automatically with Anui and then discarded, as well as be discarded from the deck to the drop zone off the skill of Halibadra. So you're not going to be breaking with these very much, meaning that this should be one of the only non-shield value cards that are even in your hand. Not to mention that we also have really powerful blitz orders for defense, like Twin Cast Protect, which can even be played for the drop zone, and Threatening Roar in order to bounce back a shield card and reuse it. So you're not going to be as defensively dead in the water as you were in previous variants. So I think it's fine to run 3 Persona Ride copies. Now let's go ahead and talk about one of the biggest changes to this deck, which is the new Seal Blaze Sword Dyaava and the Seal Blaze Shield Bowdhanath. So Dyaava has 2 skills. You pay a counterblast in order to arm it, assuming you arm it normally. And the first skill says that when you arm it, you choose on your Vanguards and it gets the continuous skill that all of your front row units get 5,000 power until end of turn. Now, this continuous skill is only going to last until the end of the turn, meaning that if you want it again, you're going to have to re-arm it the very next turn. But it's worth noting that the card that you arm with Bavsargra, you could just do this every turn, right? Meaning that you just re-arm Dyaava from the drop zone. Now, you might be like, well, if you're arming it on the Vanguard, how is it going to get back in the drop zone? See, well, that's where its second skill comes into play. When the unit armed with this card attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, you're able to give +1 drive to that unit. So it's like a triple drive, but it's not actually a triple drive, meaning their Elementaria doesn't get to be played for free, so a very nice subtle benefit there. You give it an extra drive until the end of that battle. However, at the end of the turn, you're forced to put Dyaava into the drop zone. This is just amazing. Chef's kiss. There's nothing about this skill that I don't absolutely love. Not only is it grade 3 greater restriction, so that's kind of like the fair part of it that keeps it from being absolutely busted, but it's a free extra drive, meaning that it's giving you an extra card in the hand vicariously through the drive check. So it's not a neg to put a card from Hand of the Soul to arm this card. It's a break even because you're getting that drive afterwards, and it's free. Furthermore, because it's only until the end of the turn that you have to put this into the drop zone, that means that it's still going to be there until the end of the battle phase. So cards like Dvistiya here, which require you to have 2 or more cards armed to your Vanguard to get its plus 10,000 power, they're going to be able to still get to see that with this, unlike the old sword where PCV would actually have to sort of put itself into the drop zone at the end of that battle. The same thing with Chandra, which that's actually something worthy of note there. Both Chandra and PCV are kind of rolled into one card with this. Not only do you give a strong power up like with PCV, you're also getting the drive like with Chandra. However, you're not paying the a ridiculous Counterblast 2 cost for them, and the power-up is stronger, and the drive being able to be put on it, even if you restand it off the skill of a drag meta. Like, yeah, actually, because it's not until end of turn, it's not a once per turn skill to give the drive when your Vanguard attacks. If you restand it off drag meta, you're going to get that drive twice over. Now, the drive is until end of battle, so it's only going to be 2 instances of 3 drive checks, but that's more than enough to really outclass a lot of people. I mean, shoot, if you look at the fight night I just did with Leo Lamorta, I did just that with that combo, and it was absolutely devastating and basically cleared out the opponent's defenses right then and there. So Dyaava is just more or less a perfect arms card. There's no reason not to run multiple copies of this. The only reason why I'm not running more than 2 is because this version of the deck is going to prioritize a lot of compression and consistency. You're going to be arming from the drop zone a lot. You don't want to arm from the hand, so you don't want to clunk up with arms cards in the hand. Ideally, you should be getting 1 to 2 arms cards in the hand on turn 1 to then discard off ride line skills, and then dumping a couple extras to the drop zone off the skill of Halibadra. So from there, you may only have like 1 or 2 left in the deck to work with, and you don't need them anymore because your Vanguard is going to be arming herself continuously over and over and over again. So there should never be an instance where you really need an arms card unless you're trying to use it for the draw power of the new grade 2, which I'll explain in just a bit. Now, moving on from Dyaava, we have Bowdhanath. Now, Bowdhanath also costs a counterblast to arm onto Bavsargra, but its benefits are wildly different. Now, first off, when it's armed on the Vanguard, you're able to draw a card, just straight up. It's the same thing as a Dvistiya. You draw when you arm. It's beautiful. And then you have a second skill where auto on the Vanguard circle once per turn. When the unit armed with this card is attacked, you're able to give 10,000 power to that card automatically. So it's just like the original shield. However, if you pay an additional Soul Blast cost, then it's 20,000 instead of 10,000. That's pretty huge. It's like a free front trigger that you didn't even need to play from the hand for just a mere Soul Blast. And this is where I think this deck becomes a little bit more Soul Blast intensive, because this in combination with Aksayya means that over the course of like your turn or your opponent's turn, you're Soul Blasting 3. And you're only building back 1 with Bavsargra herself, so you have to make up the difference with cards like Vylord or Cindy or whatnot. There's a lot of ways to build back souls, so this isn't a really big issue, but it is worth noting in case if you're soul blasting like crazy, you may lock yourself out of one of these skills in the late game. Then although this deck has a lot of power going for it, and it even now has like more offense with a certain grade 2 we'll talk about in a second, again more on that in a minute, this deck doesn't routinely close out games until turn 4, turn 5, maybe even a little bit longer if you're facing a particularly tanky deck. So it is worth being cautious about your resources and really planning out where and when you're going to Soul Blast for maximum effect, right? For instance, with the skill of Bavsargra here, you may not want to Soul Blast in the late game, because if your opponent is at say 5 damage anyway and they only have like a 1 card in the front row, you're not going to get a draw off it, and the critical is effectively overkill because you just need to get them to 6 damage anyway, and who knows, maybe they'll heal out of it, but you're not going to want to anticipate that. So the critical is likely just overkill, as I said before. So you got to be careful and know when to use your resources, right? Because this deck can choke out on resources if you don't play wisely. And I would say this is very much a wisdom-based deck where you have to know when to play certain cards based on the matchup and how your opponent's attitude is towards you. So that is worth noting. Now, there's a couple of old faces here. We're running 1 each of the set 12 arms cards that we got, which is the Sealed Blaze Axe Tvashtar and Sealed Blaze Hammer Suriiya. Now, Tvashtar is a fairly obvious one. It gives Battle Door to your Vanguard, and if that wasn't enough, you can also counterblast 1 and drop it to choose a left AD arm from the drop zone and arm it to your Vanguard. This is more powerful than it's ever been before, because not only do you get the Battle Door, but when you put back on the shield is now the thing that draws you a card. So at the end of the turn, you're not only going to get this 10k, maybe 20k like automatic defensive card, you also get a free draw out of it. And I say free because normally this would cost a counterblast 1 anyway. So this is just CBing instead, and you just arm this without having to pay that counterblast cost. It's super sublime. So yeah, we're going to win the run accent. Generally speaking, with this combo, what you're going to want to do is you drop it off of Halibadra, and then you rearm it off the skill of either Aksayya, or if you're doing a Vylord combo, you do Vylord instead, which is also a counterblast. So do be careful about your CB plays, because you can't choke on that if you're using it liberally. Now, Suriiya is kind of an avant-garde choice here, but there's 2 reasons why I'm going to run it. So to refresh y'all on what it does, when it's armed, you can choose a back row rear guard your opponent controls and retire. Also, your Vanguard gets 10,000 power until end of turn. Note, that one's an auto skill. So even if you rearm with something else, that 10k is going to linger until the end of the turn, unlike something like Pre-VV was. So that is pretty neat. If you arm with this first and then use Bavsargra's skill to then rearm with Dyaava, they basically stack at that point. Now, its other skill states that at the end of the turn, you can put in the drop zone or choose a right deity arm from the drop zone, add it back to the hand. Now, this isn't really that useful at the end of the day, but there is one case scenario where this is a pretty nice arms card to have, and it's when you're going first, because if you've noticed, right, the main benefit of Dyaava is when your opponent is at grade 3 or greater. So when you're going up against a grade 2 Vanguard, your right deity arms is only going to be giving you a pretty nice 5k to the front row, which is definitely a fair benefit, but it may not be the strongest benefit around. So what you can do instead, right, is arm with Suriiya, give 10,000 your Vanguard, possibly pick off a back row that your opponent wasn't anticipating of being picked off, and then at the end of the turn, you drop it in order to add back Dyaava from the drop zone to the hand. That way, next turn, what you can do is you can either discard it off a PG, you can rearm it to your Vanguard, and then use the skill of Bavsargra to then arm herself on top of that, maybe with the second Dyaava. So that's another way of getting the double Dyaava uses. Or if you already have another Dyaava and you don't feel like it, you could also just use Dyaava as the cost of Bavsargra's skill in order to put a card from hand in the soul and arm herself. So it's a very versatile card. You're only going to use it for the niche case scenario that you're going first. But aside from that, even then, it's still worth it because let's bear in mind that Halibadra requires different card names to be dropped. So let's say that you drew into Axe, right? You may not need to put in a second Vodafone or whatever, so it might be more prudent to try and throw in a Suriiya just so you can get that out of the deck and be in the drop zone where it rightfully belongs. So even for that reason, that's why I'm going to run the one-of copy there. This is a very, very lean, efficient arms card lineup. You can make it more robust as you wish, and I don't think there's going to be any brick case scenarios with these for the most part. You shouldn't run into that issue for the most part. Even if you're in a scenario where you only get one add off of this, let's say that you added the sword off of it, right? And then you damage check a shield. You still have another shield in the deck to discard off a Halibadra, or if you draw into it, then you draw into it. You shouldn't be bricking on that, right? So don't worry, you'll be fine. Now, moving on to the brand new grade 2 Yyugmashad. This is a ludicrously powerful card to the point where I find it controversially so. So this has two skills. And the first one is auto. When it's placed on the rear circle, specifically from the hand, that's a good thing to note. If you have a Sealed Blaze Vanguard, which means that it also works with Halibadra, so you can do this on turn 2 if you like, you're able to Energy Blast 3 and discard an arms card from the hand. And then you draw 2 cards. That's right. You pitch 1, draw 2, and it gets 5,000 power until end of turn if the opponent's at grade 3 or greater. That's going to become really important because auto on the rear circle once per turn at the end of the battle that your Vanguard with Bavsargra in its name attacked. If your opponent is grade 3 or greater, CB1 and stand this unit. So yes, Bavsargra has a restander, and not only is it a restander, but it's not even like locked to just one extra attack. If you have double Yyugmashad on the front row, you can CB2 and stand both of them. And this is insane. I mean, what is there not to love about this, right? Not only is it a restander for a price that you can rightfully pay because Trick Moon is giving you a counter charge every turn if you play it correctly, it's also worth noting that this card can power up itself. It's a card that can also be played from the hand to unbrick your hand, so there's more incentive to play it even if you don't want to restand it. It only restands at the end of the battle that Bavsargra attacks, and that's really important because that means that, let's say that you swing at Bavsargra and your opponent guards it, but they don't have any damage. You can then choose not to restand, and then thus they're damage denied after PGing your Vanguard, which is a really sneaky play that you could do. It's also worth noting that this is great because let's say that they did take Bavsargra's attack and hit into something like double defensive, or maybe they hit into a defensive over trigger. You can choose not to restand Yyugmashad whatsoever and save on your costs, so you don't even have like a daring restand that forces you to commit ahead of time. No, this restand is effectively perfect. The only thing that stops it from being giga busted is that your opponent needs to be at grade 3 or greater, so you can't bum rush them while they're on grade 2, which is a very fair thing. I really am happy that they at least had some tact there, but still, it's a insane card. And while you don't need to run 4 of it, I would definitely suggest running 4 of it, because the fact of the matter is you need to hard draw into this to see its value. It has a place from hand skill, and the only way to do that is to hard draw it. And this is a card that you can't resurrect off of Bavsargra because it's a grade 2 card. So even if it got like retired, you can't bring it back. Even Farhat, which is an energy cycle that you could potentially run in this deck, you can't bring it back because Farhat only chooses a grade more or less without Sentinel. So That's the one thing about this card to be bearing in mind. Let's say you did call in turn 2. If your opponent is smart, they're going to attack on this and not give you that. So be careful when you commit that, because if you commit it, you better be prepared to use it to the full extent before your opponent wisens up and gets that thing off the field. Alrighty, and now to move on to the rest of the deck list. This isn't going to require as much explanation because these are more or less the same old, so I'll just quickly explain why they're here at the ratio that they are. So first off is Dvistiya. So Dvistiya is a 3K, is a 3 of copy because you need to see Trick Moon, perhaps even more than ever. And while Ride Line is really good at get you the arms cards that you need for combat, they aren't good at getting you your dress boosters. So this is the card that you're going to use to actually fetch them. If you happen to see 2 of them, what you could do is you could just get the one that you need. So for instance, if you haven't seen Trick Moon yet, you prioritize Trick Moon, and then if you have seen Trick Moon, you prioritize Vylord. It's as simple as that. Next, we're also going to run 2 of Aparla. So Aparla is a fairly recent card. I believe it was set 4 that it was released, and with set 4, they gave us a card that not only can get you another mill card, so when you place it from the hand, again, just like Yyugmashad, you need to place it from the hand, you can dump a card with the overdress or dress boost ability, so Vylord or Trick Moon. Or you can also dump an arms card, although that may not be necessary, especially if you're playing this on like turn 2, but it is worth noting that it's just even more ways of deck compressing, what this deck is really good at. And now that you have an extra drive, I mean, shoot, that deck compression is going to be more viable than ever. But what we're really here for is the second skill, where out on the drop zone, when your Vanguard is armed, you're able to energy blast 3 and call it to rear circle. So this alongside Yyugmashad are going to be the 2 forms of energy blast they have in this deck, and they're pretty good. Like one will be really good for unclogging your hand in case you did happen to have an arms card, but it's not that necessary because realistically speaking, you could have also fodderized it for the skill Bavsargra Aksayya, but if you just felt like an easy +1 was in the name of the game, that this is probably better than fodderizing it. So even though it's not necessary, it is nice to have. This meanwhile is really nice to have if you're going up against field control matchups, because if your opponent is wiping out your board every single turn, well, aside from Vylord, because Vylord can't be chosen by opponent's card effect, so it's pretty hard to get off the field, then this will be a good way to make a clapback for just an easy 3 energy. So it's good to run a couple of this guy because you only really want to see 1, and he's not always necessary, which is why I think 2 is the perfect ratio for him. Now, a couple other great choices to note would be the Blitz orders I talked about earlier. Twin Cast Protect, a lot of people are running this, especially in the metagame right now. It's just 2 instances of shield. It's really good, and because a lot of your order plays are during your turn, you don't really care about playing during the opponent's turn, although it is worth noting that between this Threatening Roar and also Elementary Sanctitude, I'm running 3 Blitz orders, so you may want to be a little bit cautious about clogging up on Blitz orders in the hand. But one really nifty thing that you can do in this deck is that with Bavsargra Aksayya, you can put Twin Cast into the Soul, and then you Soul Blast afterwards, and thus it's in the drop zone in a very useful manner where you can just play it from the drop zone and not interrupt your Blitz order for the turn. Then you got Defensing Roar. Defensing Roar is just one of the cheekiest things that a Dragon Empire deck can bring to bear, because you choose one of your Guardians, and not only does it get 10,000 shield, but it returns to your hand after you're done guarding with it. I mean, guys, over trigger, guard, use Threatening Roar, 60k guard, bounce back 50k guard with 50k again. You gotta love it. Now, moving on to the grade 1. So our grade 1s, and I guess also Trick Moon, which is technically a grade 0, but you can kind of consider it the grade 1 or less category, which is what Bavsargra is looking for her revival skill. There's a fair bit of the usual suspects here, right? So we have 3 Vylord. You don't need 4 Vylord because you already have a couple of searchability with it, and realistically, you only are ever going to need 1 to 2 Vylord to be seen because Bavsargra Aksayya can overdress it from the drop zone. So with that added stability, you don't feel pressured to max out just to make sure that you can overdress whenever you want to. This can help out. Speaking of which, you also have access to Sealed Blaze Maiden, not Sealed Blaze Maiden Cindy, just Blaze Maiden Cindy. She doesn't got the blue fire, she's the red fire, so she's just a Blaze Maiden. Now, Cindy is a promo card for this deck that's very strong. If you have a Bavsargra Vanguard, you can put into the Soul to choose an overdress, cross overdress, or arms card from the drop zone and return it back to the hand. I mean, what's there not to love about this? You can add back like either of these fine gentlemen, or you can also add back an arms card if you're trying to do like the double arm maneuver. So let's say you arm off of Bavsargra and then call over Trick Moon, which this is going to be important because the second skill of Cindy states that when your Trickstar Trick Moon is placed on the rear circle by your grade 3 or greater Vanguard's ability, you can call to the rear circle if she isn't already there on rear circle. So the combo is you throw down a card with Bavsargra Aksayya, and then you arm herself, you call Trick Moon, Cindy calls herself in response to that, and then you throw her into the Soul and you add back a card, like maybe Vylord if you want to overdress, maybe you add back a different arms card so that you can then re-arm Bavsargra, because note that this arm isn't like the arm for the turn, right? And then on top of that, you're also then able to from there, Soul Blast out Cindy off the skill of Soul Blast 2 for crit and maybe draw retires, and then Cindy's back in the drop zone where she belongs. Beautiful. Totally cyclical nature, which is one of this deck's strong points. On top of that, we're running a one of a Shoddy. So this Sealed Blaze Maiden, not a lot of people know about it, but it's really nifty as a one of. So when it's placed on the rear circle from the hand, a lot of that I know, and this one's particularly annoying because you can actually resurrect grade 1 or less from the drop zone off the Vanguard. If you have 2 or more normal units of Blaze Maiden in their card names, which note, this is also regarded as Sealed Blaze Maiden Bavsargra at all times, so this will meet that condition along with her herself, so you just need them 2 on the field, right? You Soul Blast 1 and you dump a Trick Moon from the deck, like straight up, you just send it from the deck to the drop zone. I mean, that's just, there's nothing else to say about that, right? Trick Moon is one of the key parts of your deck, and if you can't see it off your top 7 searches or just from hard drawing a bunch of cards, you can just force it in there. And even if you already have a Trick Moon, it doesn't hurt to have a second or a third, because this is your strongest booster aside from Vilord, because it will give 10 to 20,000 power to anything it boosts, not just the Vanguard. It just checks the Vanguard for how much it's going to be giving a power boost. It doesn't actually only boost the Vanguard for that skill. That's super incredible. So most of the time it's going to be a 25k booster. That's huge. And then if you're using this for Vilord, well, Vilord's giving 10k to the front row, which this is something worth noting. So Vilord's dress boost skill, that when it in the overdress so when it's in the overdress state, you boost with it, right? And you get 5,000 your front row for each card armed to your Vanguard, which is 10,000. It also doesn't care what it's boosting. So let's say that you had a field, right, and Yyugmashad is up there. You boost Vilord with Yyugmashad, give 10,000 to that front row, and then with one or maybe even both Yyugmashad stand up, they're still going to benefit from that 10,000 to front row, which means that at max value, one of this translated to 50,000 cumulative power, and this was free. That's pretty good. So yeah, you can see why I think this is going to be one of the strongest decks out of set 7, right? Again, I don't know what Artisari is going to do, but in before that reveal, I'm going to hedge my bets that this is probably going to be the strongest deck in set 7, right? So Trick Moon, its benefits are obvious. I already talked about it a lot. It countercharges, it gives you dress boost, it's key for Vilord, everything wants it. So it's just a key mandatory 4F card. I think running less than 4 Trick Moon is just not a good decision. You shouldn't do that. Now, for your regulars, you've got 3 PGs, 1 Elementary Sanctitude. You can honestly, if you like these blitz orders, you could like cut out the Elementary Sanctitude, but there are more cards that are actually getting triple drive as an ability, so it's probably not a good idea to go without your Elementary Sanctitude. And also sometimes guard restricts are going to get cut by that. Like, you never know when Dragstrider Luar is going to come down against you, right? And then for triggers, we're going to be running 8 critical triggers, 4 normal heals, because the meta doesn't really incentivize one heal versus the other, so I'd rather just get the consistent 15k at all times. And then we're running 3 front triggers because, especially Yyugmashad now, you just get so much power and a good stable front row going that the power gain from this is just worth it. And it's also worth noting that realistically speaking, because of all the searchability from Bavsargra and your ride line, you don't really need the draw trigger to see pieces, especially when multiple of your pieces like your City, Trick Moon, and your Parla can just resurrect themselves every single turn. So you're not inclined to really keep digging. After a certain point, you're just kind of decking yourself out, it feels like. And then finally, Drek Veda. Drek Veda is arguably the best over trigger next to, if not greater than, Elder Breath. So you know, it's the fact that you can use it is really nice, and this deck is one of the best ones of using it, because if you have a Dyaava and Axe on Bavsargra, then you're swinging with a card that has 3 drive checks, an extra critical, battle door, and it's probably already inherently huge because of things like dress boost and also the dress boost of Vilord to give power to the front row, right? So you're looking at a Vanguard that just has like all the things, right? Guard restrict, crit, drive, power, it's got everything. So yeah, just a fantastic target off the skill of Drek Veda. It's worth noting, by the way, that Yyugmashad is only a once per turn for its restand, so you can't get some like super silly 8 attack turn if you use 4 CB. By the way, if you ever were in that situation anyway, Godspeed to you, Pilgrim. But yeah, you can't do that anyway, so you know, thank God for that. But still, Drek Veda should more or less be an auto win if you check it, especially with that kind of setup. And that's going to do it for this deck profile. So if you guys did like this deck profile, then do be sure to let me down in the comment section below what you did like, maybe some comments on what you would add to it, some changes. It's worth noting that I do have a good sideboard of options here to go over. A DT if you want to run an additional arms card. This is just more draw power. Radiance Caliburn and Gradius Gradle are actually pretty good alternate regardless pieces, and the reason why these are actually more consistent now is because you don't have to normal arm your Vanguard every single turn, so you can just put a card from hand and soul and then just like use this as your technical normal order play for the turn. Expecta if you want to go more towards the overdress direction, because now that you can overdress Vilord from the drop zone, you can get like even more consistent power up from this guy. Kanshati is here to search out arms cards, but also puts an arms card into the soul to draw. So that's a way of not only getting draw power, but also filling up your soul. Alshania is good in control matchups because it can CB to choose a Great more or less for the drop zone and call it a rear circle. So now you can get even more resurrections going. Shabda can resurrect itself for a counter blast, so it's kind of like a Parla, but it's using a different resource. But the reason I don't use it is because CB's kind of more difficult to maintain compared to energy, because a lot of your energy is optional. And then you got Samadhi, so Samadhi can retire itself to Armorkahr for the drop zone. So this is another way of juggling your swords or Bowdhanath to get more like power or draw advantage. It's not really that necessary at the end of the day, so I feel like it's not really worth the resurrection when you probably want to be resurrecting Trick Moon or overdressing into Vylords instead. But it's worth noting if you want to just keep looping stuff. And finally, I did throw draw triggers here just in case you felt like you actually did want a lot more draw power, and the defense of this deck was enough that the 10k shield is still worth it comparatively speaking. You don't really need the 20k shield. I just think that the 20k shield is definitely better overall, especially because of the ridiculous numbers that standard format has been coming to these days. But yeah, that's going to do it for my Vanguard deck profile. So like I said before, comment if you like this. If there's anything that you would change, comment that too. And if you want to suggest another deck profile for me to do in the future, then do be sure to let me know, because I do read your guys' comments. So maybe you want Vaseruk, maybe when Artisari gets revealed, you'll want a deck profile of that. I'm all ears, so let me know that. And with all that said, take care, God bless.